My name is Mona Lisa. Today I will be sharing a confession I can't continue hiding anymore. I live in Memphis. I lost my husband 5 years ago, and living as a widow hasn't been easy. That Saturday night, the air was cold, the house was quiet, and I found myself craving something warm, comforting. I picked up my phone, ordered a pizza, and waited. Ensure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. I must admit, sharing this story feels a little embarrassing, but trust me, it's one worth hearing until the very end. As I sat there, wrapped in my silk robe, my reflection stared back at me from the bedroom mirror. At 60, time had been kind to me. My curves were still in place, my skin still had a glow, and I often caught men's lingering gazes whenever I stepped out. But beauty is no shield against loneliness. The silence in the house was suffocating. My sons had their lives, their families, and I had an empty bed and memories. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I adjusted my robe, took a deep breath, and opened the door. There he stood, a young man, 21 years old, tall and lean, his delivery uniform fitting snugly against his toned body. His name tag read Jake. He had warm brown eyes, a boyish charm mixed with a quiet confidence that immediately intrigued me. His breath formed small clouds in the chilly air, and he shifted slightly on his feet, nervous yet composed. I took the pizza, but something about his presence made me pause. Instead of closing the door, I met his gaze and, before I could stop myself, said, "Would you like to come in for a moment? Just to keep me company." Jake hesitated, clearly surprised, then gave me a small, polite smile. Sure, just for a little while." He stepped inside, and the warmth of my home wrapped around us. I gestured toward the couch, and he sat, his movements careful, as though unsure if he belonged. I poured us some soda, feeling a strange thrill as I handed him a glass. We started talking, small talk at first. The weather, his job, the usual pleasantries. But soon, the conversation took on a deeper tone. I learned he was in college, working this job to make ends meet. There was something about him, mature beyond his years, self-assured, yet still carrying the innocence of youth. His voice was smooth, his words thoughtful. I found myself laughing, something I hadn't done in a long time. His eyes held mine when he spoke, and I liked the way his lips curved when he smiled. His breath was fresh, his scent clean, and the warmth of his presence filled the emptiness in the room. As we talked, I noticed how we had gotten closer without even realizing it. Our knees brushed, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. It had been years since I had felt this way, since a man had looked at me the way Jake was now, as if he saw something beyond my age, beyond the years I had carried. Silence settled between us, heavy and charged. I felt his gaze lower to my lips for the briefest moment. I didn't think. I didn't overanalyze. I leaned in. Our lips met in a slow, tentative kiss, gentle at first, testing the waters. His lips were soft, warm, inviting. A thrill ran through me, a forgotten excitement, a surge of something reckless and thrilling. He responded, his hand innocently on my waist, and for a moment, time disappeared. Then in a flash, he got down on both knees and did it to me. It felt just so good and I was losing my breath. Then reality crept in. I pulled back, my breath uneven, my mind racing. I shouldn't, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. Jake exhaled slowly, his eyes steady. "I understand," he said, but he didn't move away. A battle raged within me. The responsible woman inside me told me to stop. But the lonely woman, the one who had spent 5 years feeling invisible, wanted to hold on to this moment. Jake stood up, running a hand through his hair. "I should go," he said softly. Before he could take another step, I reached out and grabbed his hand. "Stay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just for a little longer." His fingers tightened around mine, his smile returning. He sat back down, closer this time. And for the first time in years, I let myself forget the past and live in the moment. He got a call and made his way to the door. I hurriedly reached for my phone and got his number before he could step out. Just as he turned to leave, he planted a soft kiss on my cheek and wrapped me in a warm hug. His body was firm, radiating heat against my silk robe. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, allowing myself to savor the warmth, the closeness, the way his scent lingered around me. When he finally pulled away, his eyes locked onto mine, a silent message passing between us, something unspoken yet deeply felt. He gave me one last, lingering look before stepping into the cold night. That evening, I felt so alive. My heart still raced, my skin still tingled where his lips had brushed against me. It had been years since I felt this way, desired, seen, wanted. I poured myself a glass of wine and curled up on the couch, my thoughts still consumed by Jake. My fingers absent-mindedly traced my lips as I replayed every moment, the stolen glances, the way his hand brushed mine, the nervous yet confident way he looked at me. Was it real? Or was I just caught up in the loneliness of my existence? 2 days passed. I had saved his number in my phone, staring at it more times than I wanted to admit. Should I call him? The idea made my heart pound, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Hey, I can't stop thinking about you? That felt too forward, too desperate. Yet, the pull inside me was undeniable. I spent those 2 days trapped in my own emotions, going back and forth between my desires and my fears. Was it foolish for a woman of 60 to be this drawn to a man so young? Or was it just life reminding me that I was still alive? It was on a cold Tuesday evening when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a nervous excitement fluttered in my chest as I made my way to the door. Could it be? As soon as the door swung open, my breath caught. Jake. He stood there, his hands buried in his pockets, a shy yet knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The cold air made his cheeks slightly pink, and the sight of him standing there, looking at me, sent a wave of warmth through my body. Without thinking, without hesitation, I pulled him inside. In what felt like a flash, our lips met. The world blurred around us. His hands found my waist as he pulled me closer, and I melted into him, my fingers threading through his hair. The warmth of his lips against mine erased all doubts, all hesitation. Jake backed me up against the door, his body pressed lightly against mine, his kiss deepening with urgency. My breath hitched, my heart racing in a way it hadn't in years. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathless. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes dark with something that made my stomach flutter. I wasn't sure if you wanted to see me again, he admitted, his voice husky. I let out a small laugh, running my fingers along his jaw. I've been thinking about you, I confessed. A slow smile spread across his lips before he leaned in again, this time softer, slower, savoring the moment. He kissed me like I was something precious, something to be cherished. We moved to the living room, the dim glow of the fireplace casting soft shadows against the walls. We sat on the couch, our bodies close, his fingers grazing my hand, my knee. I loved the way he spoke, his voice deep, his words thoughtful. He wasn't just some boy with a fleeting interest. He saw me, he listened, he made me feel young again. As the hours passed, the space between us disappeared. My hands found their way to his chest, tracing the outline of his muscles through his shirt. His fingers brushed against my collarbone, sending a shiver down my spine. Was it wrong? I didn't care. That night, loneliness didn't exist. That night, I let myself forget time, forget the world, forget everything except the man holding me like I was the only thing that mattered. We did it twice that night. The morning after, when I woke the next morning, the house was still and quiet, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. I turned over, expecting to find Jake beside me, but the space was empty. For a moment, my chest tightened with an ache I didn't understand. Then, I heard the faint sound of movement from the kitchen. I pulled on my robe and padded barefoot to the doorway. Jake stood there, shirtless, making coffee. The sight of him, so comfortable, so effortlessly at ease in my home, made something stir inside me. I leaned against the wall, just watching him. He turned, caught me staring, and grinned. "Good morning," he said, his voice still laced with sleep. "Good morning," I whispered, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in years. He walked over, wrapping his arms around me, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "Last night," he started, his voice soft. I placed a finger over his lips. "Don't ruin it with words," I said. Jake chuckled, pressing another kiss to my lips. And in that moment, I knew, whatever this was, whatever it meant, it was real. I had spent so long trapped in my loneliness, in the belief that my time for passion, for love, had passed. But life had a way of surprising you, of showing you that no matter how many years had passed, you could still feel young, still feel wanted. As we stood there, wrapped in the warmth of the morning, I realized something. Maybe age didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was this feeling. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe in happiness again. As we stood there, wrapped in the warmth of the morning, I realized something. Maybe age didn't matter. Maybe what truly mattered was this feeling. The undeniable, electric sensation of being wanted, of being alive. For the first time in years, I let myself believe in happiness again. Jake's arms remained around me, firm yet gentle, his touch steady. His forehead rested lightly against mine, his breath warm against my skin. I closed my eyes, inhaling the scent of him, a mix of fresh coffee and something purely him, something that had now become familiar in the best way. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. Everything felt so surreal. Just a few days ago, I had been drowning in loneliness, accepting that my life was meant to be filled with echoes of the past. And now, here I was, standing in my kitchen, feeling a rush of something so intoxicating, so beautifully unexpected. Jake pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching mine. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his lips curving into a knowing smile. I let out a small, breathy laugh. "Maybe? Are you regretting last night?" His voice held no fear, no doubt, just curiosity. I shook my head. "No, not even for a second." Relief flickered in his gaze before he leaned down and kissed me, soft, slow, like he had all the time in the world. My fingers instinctively reached for him, sliding into his hair as I deepened the kiss. I could feel the heat building between us again, the silent pull that neither of us wanted to resist. But something inside me urged me to slow down. I pulled away gently, my fingers lingering on his cheek. "Stay for breakfast," I whispered. His lips brushed against my forehead and he grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The smell of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee filled the air as we moved effortlessly around the kitchen. It felt natural, too natural, almost as if we had done this 100 times before. He took over the stove while I set the table, sneaking glances at him every few minutes. Jake looked good in my kitchen, too good. His youthful energy mixed with an unexpected confidence, making it hard to look away. This wasn't just a boy playing house. This was a man who knew how to move through the world, who understood the weight of life. "I feel like I should be helping," I said, smiling as I reached for the plates. "You already are," he replied, glancing at me over his shoulder. "By just being here." Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip. I hadn't been someone's reason for happiness in so long. When breakfast was ready, we sat across from each other, the morning light dancing on his features. He was watching me, not just looking, but really seeing me. It was both thrilling and terrifying. "You're quiet," he said, tilting his head slightly. "I'm just processing," I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. He set his fork down and leaned in. "I know this is probably unexpected for you," he said. "But I want you to know that I'm here because I want to be. Not because I think this is some reckless adventure, or because I don't know what I'm doing." I looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't just some young delivery guy I had kissed on impulse. He was something more, someone who had walked into my life at a moment I never expected, but perhaps needed more than I had realized. "So what does this mean?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Jake took a deep breath, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his coffee mug. "I think it means whatever we want it to mean." He reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. "But I do know one thing, I'm not ready to walk away from this." I swallowed hard. Could I do this? Could I really let myself embrace something so unconventional, so unplanned? The day stretched on, and we moved through it effortlessly, walking in the garden, talking about everything and nothing, stealing soft kisses between sips of coffee. But as the afternoon sun began to lower, reality began to creep in. This bubble we had created, this beautiful, unexpected moment, wouldn't be able to keep the outside world at bay forever. Jake must have sensed my hesitation because he reached for my hand as we sat on the back patio. "You're overthinking again," he teased lightly. I exhaled, looking down at where our fingers intertwined. The contrast was stark, my hands, lined with years of experience, and his, younger but no less steady. "What happens when people find out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "When my sons hear about this." "When you're friends, I don't care what anyone thinks," Jake interrupted gently. "And neither should you." I let his words settle in my chest, trying to absorb the simplicity of them. But life was never that simple, was it? Still, as he pulled me into his arms once again, I let myself push the doubts away. The days that followed were filled with stolen moments, late-night phone calls, secret rendezvous, whispered confessions under dim lights. It was intoxicating, exhilarating. But with each passing day, the reality of our world outside the walls of my home loomed larger. When my best friend, Claire, found out, she didn't hide her shock. "Mona Lisa, are you out of your mind? He's just a boy." "He's a man," I corrected softly, refusing to let her dismiss what this was. Her expression softened. "But you're 60. You've lived a whole life. Do you really think this can last?" I didn't have an answer for her. All I knew was that I had never felt more alive than when I was with Jake. When my oldest son, Eric, found out, his reaction was much worse. "Mom, are you serious? This guy is barely older than your grandkids. What do you think people will say?" I sighed, feeling the weight of their judgment. But when I looked across the room and saw Jake standing there, his gaze unwavering, his presence a steady force, I knew that whatever we had was worth fighting for. I turned back to my son and met his eyes. "I don't care what people say. For the first time in years, I'm happy. Isn't that what matters?" Eric's expression faltered, and for a moment, I saw something shift in his eyes. He didn't understand, but maybe, just maybe, he was willing to try. As the months passed, the whispers continued, but they no longer had power over me. Because every time Jake looked at me, I felt it: love, desire, something real. I had spent so many years living in the shadows of who I used to be, believing that love had an expiration date. But love doesn't care about time. It doesn't follow rules. Maybe Jake and I wouldn't last forever. Maybe one day, life would take us in different directions. But for now, in this moment, I chose love. I chose happiness. I chose us. And for the first time in years, I truly lived. Ensure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more true confessions like this one. Drop your thoughts in the comments about what you feel about this confession.